did you first come here to Arizona?
Oh, I cleared back in '44.
And how did you end up? When did you first see the canyon?
Well, in the Grand Canyon, I had been on Cataract, but didn't know anything about the Grand Canyon. And I was hiking or anything, because then it wasn't. Did remember? You can't imagine now, when nobody knew nothing about the canyon or the lands or anything. There weren't trails. There wasn't anything. But then I came up with a friend of mine on Lake Mead to the bottom, and we looked up this river, and I was up on top of Lake Mead, and he said, oh, nobody ever comes down there. And I said, nobody? And he said, oh, way back somewhere I read a man went a trip and a half or something, and that's all that I have ever read of even. I said, well, if he went, I can go. But I had swam a lot in Chicago as a kid, and then they didn't have beaches, and everything was rock that you come in on there. And that water is really wild because it always swept out of the overdrive. In the wintertime comes up clear and still does at times. And so I was used to really rough, cold water because it was rough there and cold. And as gangs, because I belonged to a little gang there in the tenement district, we always swam out there and on that rock. That's all we could do. And we swam all the time out there.
So you decided to swim?
And so I was used to swimming in the rough way too. And so then that was when I talked him in that we'd hike in where we could think of and do it by piecemeal. We'd start on the bottom and work our way up. And I said, we can go each year. I already had plans. We can take some of it and then go the next year further and work down on life preserver because, of course, not thinking of boat, couldn't afford a boat at that time. So then I got him to go. And but he had the problem because he'd been in the World War II and he'd been gassed, and then he got colder than I did, and then somehow as a result, then he swallowed water a time or two and almost drowned him. And so then a second year though, he kind of forgot this, and then I convinced him to go again. And then we went further up the canyon and hiked in, but the hikes were our problem because there weren't trails, we just went. And boy, some of those hikes were pretty scary because even for me, I been in a few problems at times. It's hiking in there. It was pretty scary. And so that I was glad to get to the river. And so we had our problems, but this time he really, really almost drowned. And so then he got out, he said, don't you ever say river to me again on swimming. And I said, I won't, because I hadn't realized, just how bad it would be. Then I went by myself, and then I swam from Phantom Ranch down myself. And then that was better. Had a life preserver. You don't say swimming, but in a life preserver. I had a Navy life preserver, and there's nothing as good as a Navy.
You walked down to Phantom and just
walked in. Well, there's nothing to bother you then. There wasn't anything there. Wasn't many people. Wasn't no ranger. Wasn't nothing. You just simply walked down, walked in the river.
What year was that?
That was, I won 45, 46, and 47. Swam once each year.
All by yourself?
Well, the last time.
Was 47.
2 times as a fellow, and then the last time. But that was better, because it was just me. Well, no problem.
Did you get out and walk around
Oh, you couldn't get out then. That's what you don't understand now. Because when I went, it was over 70,000 cubic feet of estimate now that I now know. And because it was high water then all the time. It was in June, so everything was high. And then you had, what gave you problems was the big trees. In big whirlpools in those days that you don't have now. You used to have mighty whirlpools, and I'm talking about mighty ones. And then when you got in those, you had to go with it. And then when it popped you out, if you're lucky, it would throw you out of the circle, and then you would go on down. But if you came in that circle, you went back down again. And it went around and swooped you right down. And so that's how it was. So you need to get your breath to go down again. And you never know how long you're down. If anybody ever says they do know anything about this stuff, they're lying, because you're not keeping track. All you're doing is hanging on to your breath and hoping you get up. And you even use your hand on your nose if you think there's any chance that you're going to let go. And so that's all you're hoping. You're not thinking nothing. All you're looking for is that light when you come up. So anybody's talking on that stuff, you ever hear it while they're lying. because you just don't think that way, I can tell you for sure. And because when you go down the whirlpool, because you're going with that water and not again it. And so that's real good when it throws you out.
What made you decide to start using a boat?
Well, because they become available. The first boats were the Navy boats, and the frog divers had used them. And they were something you can handle, that you can even turn over by learning how to jump on one side if they get turned over, so they look like the ideal thing. And so I didn't know the canyon at all, remember, and I just simply started. Had no idea and of anything about it. And so I just simply put in Lee's Ferry, and that was that. So everything was learned from the word go. Because I didn't know much about a lot of that stuff either, because I hadn't been doing a lot of anything like that. So everything was learned from the real ground up. But the thing that was in my favor was that after swimming, then I felt like I had the Queen Mary under me. With this air, you know, I felt, and a life preserver and all this air, why, gee, I thought I had the Queen Mary and able to carry some groceries, you know, to where then actually you had something there, and a sleeping bag, because when you swam, I didn't have anything. You just sit in a life preserver when you did get through to shore, because you never actually swam to shore. It was only when the current threw you against a wall, and this was in a narrow canyon usually, that that you just parked there, because anywhere at all was full of driftwood and everything. In the other places, you weren't about to be doing anything. You can't swim the preserver anyway. And with that kind of current, you sure aren't going to. So the more you learn to go with the water, the better off you are, because then you got deep water, but you're not in the danger that if you don't go with the current.
That mic that's clipped onto your sweater there, it's kind of rubbing against your necklace. Maybe get you to put it on the, if you move it over to your coat, or it's, maybe it won't rub then. There, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so when you were swimming then, you didn't take much food, or did you?
Oh no, then you didn't have, we didn't have these bags or nothing. Frog suits were out. You didn't have these rubber bags. You didn't have any of this stuff, and so the most I could do is the malt can from a drugstore had a double lid, and so the water wouldn't get in, because I couldn't even think of anything where water wouldn't get in it. And then I got one of those, and that wasn't much room. They're only about that high and about that wide, and then I put it in a pack sack and punched holes in this pack sack, just to put a little tiny one to put on my back, and so the water would drain out. And then I put dehydrated soup, but thinking that I could dump this can out, dip up water, and then with all the driftwood I could have a fire and have this soup. And then I had pure sugar candy. The first dehydrated coffee came out, little cans called Martha Washington, and that was what I had. And but then the very first way we discovered, of course, that hard through you get a wall, there was no wood, and then there's lots of wood in the river, but of course it's wet and you're not going to use that, so you couldn't do anything like this at all. And so then you just had the dehydrated coffee if you wanted to use it cold, period, and otherwise you just had the candy, which was pure sugar, and that was the end of that. So you didn't have much of that, and then you didn't have a sleeping bag because you couldn't carry such a thing, and then nothing was out. And not, you know, the bags, nothing come out, there just wasn't anything. And so then you sit and shivered, and you kept your preserver on, because if it threw you on a tight wall, you know, to where you're just on a little breakdown of rocks, for fear you'd fall in, you kept your preserver on. And then it was so cold because you froze to death. And you were so cold the first night, it was later when it threw us against a rock, and boy, you just shivered the whole night. You were just so froze, you were glad to go in the water so you could move your legs, because sitting on this little rock, you couldn't hardly do anything. And so actually, you were taking the water by choice, literally, so you could get moving and stretch out a little bit. And then we learned after that, if the water threw us against a wall, even at 1 in the afternoon, you stayed there, because then you got some sun. And then you might thaw out. Because the cold was your bitter enemy.
Well, how long would you go without?
Oh, you had to go until it just happened to throw you against a wall. You couldn't get in or out. Believe it or not, clear down on the low part with a motorboat, we had put some food in a Quartermaster Canyon and thought, well, now we'll be able to get out here, and for sure. And so we had food in there, And you know that we couldn't even stop at Quartermaster Canyon. There was no way that we did get stopped below it on the same side and then had to hike back to it, but that we could not stop at Quartermaster itself. The current there was that fast, there was no way you could get in. And we went by Bridge Canyon, and there were men at that time surveying. And so, of course, they were all excited, and we waved that it was okay. And we knew that they had a camp below, probably, with that many men. But if you think we could get in, there's no way. So we just had to wave to them that it was okay. We just went like this because we could see we couldn't get in.
Well, when you went down from Phantom, how many days did that?
I don't remember now, but you didn't keep track of that because what you really wanted was hopeful to land. Because never mind going, it was a case of stopping. Yeah, there was, a case of stopping. And then you got in problems when you got down towards Pierce's Ferry or anything because you had these miles of driftwood. And guys, you didn't know what to do with it because you couldn't grab hold of it. It just kind of was just too much of a mass. And that's what gave you real problems. The wood really gave you a lot of problem. The minute you didn't have the rapids so rough, then that's what gave you a problem as you started to come towards the lake. Trying to get out of Pierce's. When I first got out of Pierce's, then you had a long hike. They didn't have a road then. That was just ranch land. And they had some kind of big black cows in there when ranch did at that time. And there was nothing there. And so then it was just a trail, but there wasn't a road. And that's a long trail when you got to hike it. So first you froze to death, and then when you went across this trail to reach this road, then the heat come out in June, and then you burnt to death. You went from one extreme to the other, complete extreme. And so then we got out it was on the first trip. Then we got out to the highway, but then things would stop for you. And we're just like we were, which was probably pretty sad looking, but we hailed in the bus stop. They would do it then because they didn't see anything like this in those days. And they stopped, and we got on, and then told them, so they took us right into Boulder then. And so then at Boulder City, then we had some clothes had been sent there. And so then we got into Boulder City. But imagine those people, they were from the east, and they were looking so horrified, I can remember. And so your suit was a little torn, and you can imagine your skin, even then, although I was younger then, of course, was still rough and everything from the combination of the cold and, and everything. Then, and you didn't carry anything. So hair and all, you really looked like you were out of something, all right.